Today we have Carolyn Melby back. She's doing the artwork of Robert and Sonia Delaunay. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And I was telling people that I'm not familiar with the artwork. So I love these art lectures because I actually get to learn something as well. So that's wonderful. I just want to actually also, excuse me.
That's okay.
I wanted to thank the Agris family. This series, Artful Afternoons, is in memory of Al and Trudy Agris. So we're truly appreciative of the Agris family for allowing us to have Artful Afternoons. So Carolyn, tell us. Carolyn is an expressive arts therapist, and she works with the senior community, but you also work with children in expressive arts as well. And she has an extensive background. So welcome, Carolyn. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. And it's wonderful to be back again this fall. I think this might be my 4th fall doing Artful Afternoons with you or something like that. It's been a few of them. So it's so exciting to have this community to bring favorite artists and new artists to share with you. As Tracy mentioned, I'm a local artist and expressive arts therapist, although more so the therapist lately than time is allowed for art. And I'm always going to museums, looking at art around me, and just enjoying bringing that to others to share, because I think that art can help us to express ourselves and also to connect with the generations past and present. So I'll share my screen with a PowerPoint of Robert and Sonia Delaunay from they're from the era, I would say, early 1900s to mid 1900s was when their primary working sort of time was. And I'm trying to just get my, there we go. Can everyone see this slideshow here? They were French abstract artists of the early 20th century. They're actually both born in 1885, but they had very different early lives until their lives overlapped and they met and married and had about 30 years together as an artist partnership, which is pretty unusual for artists. Often artists are working with other musicians or dancers or theater people, but you don't often see an artist partnership. Perhaps you might equivalent to the more modern partnership of Jean-Claude and Christo. So Sonia was actually born to a Jewish family in Russia, and unfortunately in Ukraine actually, and unfortunately she family did not have much money for art, but she had a very wealthy uncle who undertook her and noticed her art experience or art talent from a very young age. And so he brought her through schooling, and then she went on to Paris where she would meet Robert. Interestingly, in Robert's story, he was actually born to pretty well-off parents in Paris, but they divorced young, and he was left with his mother and then sort of handed off to an uncle. So he also was somewhat raised and seen as a talented artist by this fortunate uncle, and ended up more in this area of theater before he went into fine art. Their work is pretty similar, but you'll see there are some nuanced differences between these two artists. They started out, Sonia more so in textiles, as pretty soon after they met, a year or two later, they had a son, and while she was making her baby blanket for the baby, she became intrigued in textile patterns and in fashion. And she used some of the patterns of her husband to create a blanket that had bits and pieces of fabric in it. And she would go on actually to do some more fashion in that area. And Robert started early on being intrigued by the Impressionists. I didn't bring that work, but you can look and show that his earlier work was influenced by the Impressionists of the late 1800s, in particular pointillism of Georges Seurat. And then he went into more of the Cubist work and also what we'll call Orphism. But this is a large piece that was painted by Sonia. That is an image of perhaps maybe we see dancers or perhaps you see movement. They both would paint in bright colors, shapes of a lot of circles, a lot of squares. But when people, a lot of these different amorphous shapes that were somewhat abstract, but also expressive and eliciting realistic, recognizable forms. So they're at the point in the early 1900s here, people are still very much into the fine artwork where the painting is like a photograph, and they're kind of pushing, you know, the envelope, as they say, by moving into abstraction, but not quite. We still see some recognizable forms here. So this was painted 1912, 1913, and this work is on display at the Centre Pompidou, which is the fine arts, modern art center in Paris, France, which has a number of their pieces. I'm fortunate that I was able to see them in person, and that was actually my first place that I learned more about this artist couple, was actually by seeing their artwork in the Centre Pompidou. As is much of their artwork, this one is a long canvas. Robert's canvases tended to be big, you know, say 9 feet by 9 feet, and Sonia's varied in size, but they both would paint very large. So everything you're seeing on the small screen, try to imagine that instead it's in your background or my background filling the wall, because that's the size that they painted. I was curious from anyone what this reminds you of. What do you see here? Would anyone like to unmute and share what you see happening in this painting?
Anyone have any thoughts?
Maybe things will come out as we move along and see some more pieces.
I just wanted to
Perhaps.
say, it looked to me like people, like images of people all kind of blending together, walking or doing something.
People all blending together. They really do, right? It's as if this big dance movement and the people's movements, and you're all blending together. I think that's what she was trying to capture.
I think it's a stunning piece. I mean, it's beautiful. You can see the movement because you can see the figures and then the swirls of color. So it really captured that.
I think I can actually see some facial details. And it looks like an elderly man with white hair, and that looks to me almost like a face. But you have,
think it is the shape and the
Great.
color
Thank
that
you.
makes it so exciting. The colors are absolutely beautiful. They
Yeah,
are
they are.
vibrant, and the variety of shapes that makes it interesting.
Did you hear Shlomit? She said the variety of shapes make it interesting.
The color is absolutely beautiful.
Yes, or exactly. So that combination of those beautiful colors, they're very eye-catching, right? Think about the beautiful colors of Impressionism. Maybe they were influenced by that. And then, as you're saying, the shapes. All of these various shapes are making our eyes dance around the painting, trying to look at all these shapes. And as someone said, the faces in the
Yeah,
painting.
both the color and the shapes likely taking you around in the picture.
I also see, it looks like in some of them are couples hugging,
Yeah, yeah, I see that.
especially the one sort of right of center,
yeah, the
orange
orange.
around a blue
Yeah.
face.
The red arm around the
Yes.
blue face with the like tan hats.
Mhm.
Yeah, maybe they're hugging or dancing, but it's very abstract, but yet we feel the sense of two people there embracing. Yeah.
There is one more thing. There is where the painting, the figures looks near you, and there is, it's like almost perspective, and then you see the small figures. So
Yes, that's true. The figures are, some of them come forward in the picture plane, some come back.
yes, that's perspective.
Interesting perspective. Yes. Yeah, it's almost like just kind of taking a photo, taking this painting, because the painting could still extend above and below and to the side. It could kind of keep going, right?
It's
Well, wonderful. Thank
almost
you for all of your, see, this is great, because when we all look at this together, sometimes we see different things.
Shlomit has a comment. Shlomit, talk closer into the microphone.
Yes, what is also interesting, I am looking in terms of figures, it is almost like a triangle, a long triangle. Because of the perspective, you have the taller, like the taller figures, and then it's getting shorter and shorter, where it almost like a long triangle. Deviations.
Yes, I can see that. So it's like the figures are larger in the middle, and then there's like this triangle kind of going down to a point with the figures and the colors. Amazing how they capture that after what they're really doing a lot of actually of the circles. They're really doing overlapping circles. They're fascinated with the spheres, but there's a sense of a triangle here. Very cool. Thank you.
Wow.
They can hear me.
Wow.
Wonderful. Let's continue on and
I love it.
continue to see more.
Good.
Oh, one more comment here.
No, continue.
Oh, wonderful. So here's one that's actually a local piece. You can go to see it at the Davis Museum at Wellesley if it's open. And this is a theme that Sonia worked in called prisms, electric prisms, or Prismes electriques. And she would do these circles, you see in a minute, that Robert would do these very fine circles, like very almost mathematical. And she would do these sort of almost moving. It feels almost like they're moving or shaking because you could see the outlines of the circles, but there's shading happening, there's overlapping, and it creates this sense of movement between all of these abstract pieces.
What is the title for the painting? What is the name? What does she call it?
Prism.
Yeah.
So electric prisms. Do you feel the electricity, like the movement of the prisms, perhaps, or the circles?
But then that's only half of the picture. The other half is already, I almost could see a face facing the prism. Okay. And yeah, right here. So it's very interesting because one half is prism, but the other half is not. It is really circular.
Yeah, so did she do that to sort of balance the composition or to think about the prism color emanating? Is what I'm thinking. Sort of the prism colors emanating here, or that like the prism is maybe within, you know, this whole system. It's sort of like a part of the whole piece, the interconnectedness of things.
The colors on the side, they are stronger than in the prism. There is this very strong red, and there is the colors are stronger. And it's almost like they are fighting each other.
Interesting. They're like fighting each other for space. I could see that.
Yeah, something, because it's like two different paintings.
So hopefully you can see in this how this might be a textile, right? You see the lines where it might come together. Maybe it'll come together in circles, but you see the vertical lines where a textile might be sewn together, not perfectly vertical or horizontal. But this came out of her making this baby blanket for her new baby boy son in 1910, just really exploring colors and exploring how they fit together.
If we think in terms of textile, that's a whole different story.
The making, indeed. The making of the textile, the planning out, very different medium, indeed.
You see, it's very
So
different.
here's another one of this series that's also at the Centre Pompidou in Paris. And remember, these are quite large, 9 by 9 feet or something like that, very big paintings. So this is a nice comparison because this is sort of on the smaller side, and then here is this much bigger composition, much more happening here.
I think about the circle, and I am questioning, my question is, what inspired her? Because I did a painting of circles, but I was inspired by seeing the raindrop in a puddle.
Ah,
And then I
fascinating.
could make, she did this similarly, you know, one circle goes into the other. So the question is, you know, how because that's the second already. That's
Mhm.
circle.
Okay, yes. Yes, so she, her husband Robert was working more, let me show you. We'll just go to one of his pieces here. So Robert's work was more like this, where it's, he has the circles interconnecting multiple circles and lines, and he was really looking at the abstraction at the time. So he's really being much more abstract, as you can see at this time period. He went through several different iterations of his work because he did some pointillist work, as I mentioned. He also did some cubist work, but he's sort of most of his career was this style where big paintings of, you know, these circles and lines overlapping, just exploring color and contrast. And he was looking actually quite a bit at some of like the theories around scientific theory, looking at you know, the way nature is, the interconnectedness of things. He was inspired by some writers, and in their time in Paris, they got to know other artists. But it is interesting that his work, you know, remember he came from a theater background, so he had a slightly different look into how he was exploring these concepts through art. So very abstract piece here, and it looks very simple at first, right? Oh, these circles, but we're going to try one later and you'll see it can really grow and grow and grow on itself.
They both do circles, but you definitely there is a distinction between the two artists.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There is a difference. The way
This one takes on more of an abstract. You said the other one, you said it's like on the way to being abstract, but not there yet. Does this, even though
That
there's
first one I showed you was sort of dancing. It's like reminiscent of moving or dancing, but this one, there's no really recognizable element other than the circles and lines, right?
yeah, it's more static.
Yeah, so we'll go back here. So I wanted to show you some more of Sonia's work first. I love this one. This is just the brightness of the color. I feel like there's just so much hope in this idea. And she actually titled it Market and Minho, which is a small market area. But of course, that's interpretive, right? I mean, it seems like there's a figure in the center, and it seems like there's a calf, you know, with horns in the right center. And maybe there are some market stalls behind. Maybe there are some people in the circles on the lower left. But it's sort of up to interpretation, right? It could also just be a beautiful melange of color.
Well, you can see the arches in the building
Mm.
top right. You can, I mean,
The
that
top
looks
right.
like a building in the background, definitely.
Mm-hmm. So even though the colors might not be the color of the building, they're
Right.
definitely the shape
Right.
that we would see as we're looking at the building. Mm. Yeah, I love comparing this one here with the circles, pretty abstract, to then notice where all the circles are here and how they're actually pretty similar. There are these like target-like circles, and then there are some that are the colors flowing, and she's actually somewhat going from that abstract idea, bring it a little bit more into the realism area. The fascination, I think, of watching what artists do and how they emerge over time. So as I mentioned, these two are very much an artist pair, although they also, they pretty much had like sort of parallel styles they were working on. So they had similar styles, but they're still both doing their own artwork. So I did say they're an artist partnership in the sense that they're supporting one another, but they're not necessarily doing the same art, Robert and Sonia. Did I hear someone else?
Were these commissioned for a museum? Because they're so grand, they're so large. They wouldn't
Yeah,
be a private home, correct?
I guess not. I guess they painted in their studio. They painted these and then they would sell them in a gallery. Robert had a pretty early show. He was only like 25 when he had 28 when he had his first solo show at a gallery. And Sonia did not have a solo show, but she ended up actually being the first female artist to have a retrospective of her work at the Louvre in 1964. So she was a pretty significant artist in that sense. She also outlived her husband by 30 years. So she had a 30 years longer career than he did to achieve quite a bit of further work in the area of art. I wanted to show you a comparison here. So this is around the same time, right? So this is 1915, this is 1919. What a contrast. We have this German expressionist, who expressionism is seen as expressing more the emotions, but still being realistic somewhat of places. So it seems like people are coming and going. There are these sort of jarring colors that are juxtaposed against one another. The figures, appear alone in a sea of faces. And what people feel like Kirchner was expressing was, World War I is looming, and World War I is happening, and that's the beginning, and people are sort of feeling a sense of maybe they're feeling lost here, and feeling a sense of isolation of what's going on. Versus this, which the circles, I think, really help to unite things. Even if it is a marketplace or if it is an abstract, the color is brighter, the composition feels more comfortable, more like emotionally safe, should we say, compared to the Kirchner piece, which this is kind of a staple in art history. People often look to this as being very much like a symptom of what was going on, reflective of what was happening in history at that time. Take a look at these to compare these two artists.
You mentioned that they use this painting a lot to compare. Is it just about World War I, or do they use this painting to compare other time periods too?
Great question. So art historians often use this painting as a kind of a mile point in sort of the pre-industrial era, and then the industrialized era happening and really being impacting the way family life is, the way people work, the way people are connected, how the move to the cities away from the countryside. So yes, great question. It's an important piece for a number of reasons, and I thought it would be a good comparison because it's around the same time and it's such a different outlook. If you think about what is this painting saying about looking forward versus what is this painting saying about the present moment or looking to the future. I thought this was fun, a little bit of side note about Sonia's work, because she veered off more into textiles in her earlier days in the 20s and 30s. And here she is with a friend with their self-designed textiles and a place where they painted the background. So I always love looking at artists and seeing their homes, because it's not just that they made art, it was often their homes were also a work of art. And in this case, her clothing is also a work of art. I wonder if anyone could see any kind of similarity between her textiles. And then if I go back to say like one of these pieces here, we can compare that. Maybe some similarities and probably some differences as well. I thought this was a hoot that her style even covered a car. Anyone drive one of these in the early 1900s? Citroen? No. Too far back, huh? So here's a little, we're going to start looking more at Robert's work. So during the same time, we have his wife is doing this piece here, the electric prism. And he is doing what he calls his Simultaneous Windows series, which will be about 5 or 6 years before World War I, because in World War I, they actually moved to Spain and Portugal. And we'll spend some time looking at the work of Spain and Portugal and being influenced as well, just to avoid, Spain, Portugal was a neutral country in World War I, so they left her there. But at this point, he's still in Paris, and perhaps you can see through this window the shape of the Eiffel Tower, and then whatever else is happening. So he's thinking about looking through a window pane and how the window pane would alter our view if we look at it from different ways of the same image, the same place. So you see, I almost see a little bit of a textile effect here with overlapping colors and, you know, the actual texture, you know, of the paint, and these overlapping or simultaneous windows, as he says. This work, if you look at Futurism, you also see a connection there. You also have in Italy, some of the futurists like Giacomo Balla are doing work where they are looking at something in time. So futurists are depicting like a movement in time. So there's one that's a famous futurist piece of a horse, where the horse captures the movements. And so perhaps you could see some of the movement here as well, this idea of looking out through the window a couple of times. This is something that I do with the groups that I lead. When I lead art, is I say, what would you like to see outside your window? And some people say, well, I like looking at it right now. And then other people say, I'd love to see something else. So I think this is intriguing. This is what he saw in a moment in time, looking outside the window, how he interpreted that into art. Here's a later piece when they return to Paris. It's one of his more popular works of art, for the color again, for the recognizable image of the Eiffel Tower, and I think also for combining his and Sonia's love of the color and the shape and form. Such a different look at the Eiffel Tower, almost photographic. I feel like if we were to have like a filter on a photograph, that's almost what it feels like.
That one is beautiful, just beautiful. So it's abstract, or getting to abstract, but yet we know it's the Eiffel Tower. You have all the abstract, you know, the shapes and everything, but then you have that recognizable part of it in the middle. It's really stunning.
Isn't it? And it's such a different view of the tower than we usually see, right? We're usually looking up, and here it's as if someone's taking a picture looking down, as if we're floating above it somehow.
I see I mean, you can see the dimension too. I mean,
Right.
you know, right? You see the side, you see the road almost, you know, coming up from the bottom. The roundabout, it looks like a roundabout there. So,
That's right. It's like placed it within the setting of its place as well with the roundabout. And yes, I love the perspective he achieves through color. I don't think there's any black and white here. I think it's all a contrast of color. And he creates, you know, that sense of depth. Robert is also known for his portraits. In looking at Sonia's work, I don't see that she does portraits. She does much more of the abstraction work. But some of Robert's portraits, which he did throughout his styles, which is fun to compare. You know, another time you could just look at his portraits across his lifetime, because he did some pointillist style, some cubist style, and then some of the style, we'll see another one. There's one of his more famous ones, but I wanted to show you this one sort of to compare to the next piece. That relatively sort of realistic, but again, we see like the circles and the lines and the sort of overlapping, you know, idea of these windows. And I'm not sure particularly flattering, but it does seem stately to some degree. He seems of importance anyway. I wanted to show you that mostly to compare to this piece, because I think it's helpful to see some of his other portrait work. I've shown this to other folks and I just love this work. So as I mentioned, they moved to Spain and Portugal during World War I, and one of the ways they were able to continue their style of these bright colors was they picked up a area medium of mixing wax into paint to make, I guess the wax would make the paint color even more luminous and have like a waxy effect. So I guess they would do that. You can see here, it does feel a little more textural than say some of the other paintings. You can see, especially on the colors in the bottom, the color, the three circles, you know, those three circles, the circles are throughout this painting actually kind of relate. Actually, let me show you here, somewhat relate to this piece, right? You can kind of see these might have been by the same artist because of those circular motifs. They used this wax technique just when they were in Spain and Portugal and incorporated it into the paint because I guess it was very tedious to melt the wax, have the paint at the right temperature, and then paint on the canvases. But it does create an interesting texture and I think adds to their range of art as artist pair. Any comments or what you see in this piece of the Portuguese woman?
You can unmute yourselves. I've just muted people just to, so there's no background noise. Just unmute yourself
Oh, thank you.
and you can shout out.
It's interesting how the skirt that she's wearing, if you go to the right, how the shapes kind of mimic the skirt. And even the apron, she has the line in between.
Mhm.
This reminds me a little bit of a Matisse.
Ah, mhm.
I mean, obviously it's not his style, but it is a little reminiscent of people and objects that are not totally in perspective, and the colors.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you both. Yes, good eye with noticing the repeating rectangular shapes from the apron going over and how that creates kind of this curve into the room. So we have that space. And yes, Matisse, I didn't think about that, but you're spot on. Yeah, so much like this is colorful works and different in obviously in the depiction, like in the brushwork, but the colors, the shapes. It's a great idea. I should look at some of those for comparison. All right, we'll move on back to this piece. We can kind of made like the full circle, right, through the work. We've seen the movement, the texture, and now we have this very much purely abstract piece, which we can still feel a sense of movement. Can you? Do you sense when you look at when your eyes go around the circle, there's something moving, it feels like there's something flowing. I think that's what they were going for in this piece. And in terms of after this point, they continued on to do to both state painters and state artists, but their work is less known. The earlier work in this, the first 20, 30 years where they were together isn't their best known work, perhaps because they were inspiring one another as artists. But Robert unfortunately passed away in 1941, and then Sonia continued as an artist living until 1979, so she would have been in the early 90s when she passed away in Paris. And she continued to do some beautiful art installations, continue in her textiles, but I think it wasn't quite the same after he had passed away.
This one is interesting in that it's really sort of Art Deco. kind of feeling a little bit more industrial. And so, it's interesting to see maybe how the art changed over time, depending on what was going on in, the art world,
Definitely. Yes. Thank you for seeing that. Right. They're definitely, this is art, a little after Art Deco, right? So that they probably had some influence. I'm sure they saw quite a bit of Art Deco living, around Europe. And then maybe some of that industrialization that I had mentioned when we saw the Kirchner piece, noticing the industrialization affecting how particular this is, right? How structured, how exact it is, reflecting that. Yes, thank you. They're definitely artists who knew a lot of other artists and were intrigued. As I mentioned, Robert had much more of a moving career in art in terms of going through various styles throughout his lifetime than Sonia did. Sonia pretty much stayed with the same style, but worked in different media. So she went into textiles, as you can see on the car. And so, interesting art pair they were. Here's a later work of hers. So you can see how her work, so if we go back, say, one of her pieces here, we have this 1914, and then we're jumping ahead 50 years to here. What a difference. And you feel it's the shift. You feel the shift in the color. The shapes are bigger, much more abstract.
Question about that one. It says triptych. Is this one of three? Or is the whole thing a triptych?
A good question. I guess it's actually just one, and she called it Triptych. That was her title. So I think she was thinking that it was in 3 pieces, but it's actually just the one.
Interesting.
Next, it's all melded together. You would think maybe there were 3 canvases.
Mm-hmm.
And our next one, I'd like to use this as a jumping off point for us to try some art inspired by these amazing artists, if you'd like to join me. So here's one from 1939. So we think this is Sonia's work, and then this is Robert's work, right? So very similar at this point, right? Very similar style, but little differences. She's still doing some of the shading. His are generally contained. It's sort of like a complete composition, right? Whereas she still sort of leaves the canvas, lets the edges kind of flow. So I thought this would be a nice place to look at this and be inspired to create our own art. If you'd like to take out colored pencils or markers, some paper, you can share with us, or you don't have to. Let's try with, be very simple, go with nice straight lines and circles. So think about lines and circles. We'll try this together. And I can go back through and show you, but what I have is, I have a ruler, and then I have one of my paint cups, and I'm going to try just experimenting with drawing 2 to 3 straight lines and then tracing the round objects. So if you have colored pencils, you can also use, or markers, you can use one to draw on the other as a straight edge. I happen to have a ruler, so I'm going to go with that. I'm just going to draw, I think I'll do just 2 straight lines to make an interesting composition here.
I don't know if you know this, but are any of her paintings in a private collection and in someone's personal collection versus are they all in museums from both?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. They definitely have been collected by private collectors. Let's see. This one is an art museum. This one is a private collection.
I see if it doesn't say it's private.
There are a few of these that are in private collections because that was a series of these. So some of those were as well. But I think that was all that I showed. This one, I don't think I remember seeing at a museum, so I think it might be a private collection. That's why it's kind of grainy. It's not in the best quality I would love. So yeah, some of them, definitely their work is in private collections and not actually selling for as much as I thought. When I think I looked at this piece, it was like on sale for, I think it was like a couple $100,000, maybe 5 years ago. And I guess I thought their work would command a lot more than that.
Huh.
Because, you know, some of the Impressionists now are millions of dollars, right?
Yeah.
So their work, as much as I'm fascinated with it, it's not as necessarily getting the numbers like, you know, Picasso or O'Keeffe or others are.
What about some of the ones that are just take up an entire wall, like from the beginning? If there's one in a museum, would it also still be like the 500,000 or in a higher range?
I don't know. That's a good question. I didn't see any of these up for sale recently. I would assume since they're bigger canvases, then they would, yeah, I would think they would be more like 500,000, but it's a good question. Yeah, it's fascinating, the art world. Right now they're getting into the crypto art, right? This idea that art is not even a physical object, it's simply a blockchain. Maybe you'll talk about that at some future group, or maybe that could be a future topic for us. Thank
Should
you
we
for that
start with a
question.
certain form? Like, I mean, you're just telling us to free form, or you're telling?
Yeah, what I'm doing, do you want me to stop this share and then I can just show my screen?
Okay.
So I'm going to
Okay.
start with just a couple of lines. So I drew using my ruler, but you could also use one colored pencil to draw the other. And the goal is to explore, as the Delaunays did, the idea of the lines and circles. So to just explore these forms as abstractions. Starting with the lines here, and then we'll do a couple of circles. Let me know when we're ready and I'll draw some circles. I'll pick another color for my circles, just because I have a bunch of colors here. Try, let me see, I'll do one, I'm going to trace this here. Okay. Here. Third circle from here. And you could follow me, or you could just kind of see where this takes you. Sometimes it's fun just to pick up a color and just sort of explore. So I spilled some water on here because I have water in my paint cup, so there's a little water on my page, but it will dry. So here's what I ended up creating so far. Yeah.
They used a special wax technique. They were living in Portugal and Spain. So is
Yeah, I had never heard about that before until I read about them. Yes, you're saying
that they worked with, or have other, do you know if other artists use that same wax technique, or is that something that artists only from that region use that wax technique?
so. Apparently, I can look more into it and let you know, because I'm quite curious about it too. As far as I know, it was just that region. So they said, like, while we're in Spain, we're going to learn how people here, you know, have a unique painting style here. In terms of that particular wax technique, it does seem pretty unique that they would mix the wax into the paint. Because what I have heard is people do paint with wax, you know, in caustic paintings, where they're, you know, have colored wax of different colors. I don't know what the wax base is, you know, if it's almost like an animal fat, or if it's, you know, more like a candle kind of thing. But there's a caustic painting that's a different style and is not as popular as oil paints, because of course in caustic it will melt at a certain temperature, right? So yeah, there are more concerns for a wax-based art in terms of taking care of it. So that's why the oil paint stands the test of time much longer versus an caustic. If it goes over a certain temperature, it's going to melt, or something might fade. I worked one place where the wax came off easily, So they couldn't really go near the painting because if something tapped it, then the wax would start chipping off.
Oh, wow.
Whereas like if you bump an oil painting, it's not going to flake oil painting on you.
Huh.
So it is, yeah, it's intriguing. Maybe I can look into that for
Yeah,
another time.
I
But
was wondering too if it was encaustic, but you answered that question. So it sounds like a different technique.
different, yes, from what I read, different from encaustic, but still is a question of if it had wax in it, at some point it might melt. So I'll have to look into. I can let you know more. Yeah. Does anyone here work in encaustic?
No, I thought about it, and then but when you melt the wax, I think I watched somebody do it at a like an open studio, and it's quite smelly.
Unexpected, yes. Yeah,
I
yeah.
try to
That's
use
funny.
sort of non-toxic materials, and so I thought, like, I love the way it looks, but I don't think I'll ever do it. But it
I
does
see what
add
you're
like
saying.
so much texture and layers, and it's quite
Yeah,
nice.
people like encaustics a lot for that, but it's just exactly. That's funny. You found it's ended up being quite smelly. Well, I guess it's good you got to go and experience what it was really like before you said, I'm going to try this out, and then never again. So I'm just exploring with this, what this is looking like. It's not looking quite like Reverend Sonia Delaunay, but I'm just kind of playing with the circles. And now I'm going to fill some of the circles in like they might do. So I'm going to fill these in with slightly different colors. Kind of just try to have fun with seeing where the color goes, what happens with the colors here. What emerges between the overlap of the circles and the lines.
See from this, now we can see from this that it's not so easy. It looks easier than it is, right?
Right, I've done this. I like the works. I've done this a few times, but yes, it's like, okay, well, it's just circles and lines. Like, well, it takes a little bit to figure out what kind of composition with circles and lines will work out, right?
I think my favorite of all that you showed was the first one, where it
Oh,
was,
interesting.
it was whimsical, but you saw the people dancing and holding each other. That one was really beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Just so it's just like the expression as well as the movement.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Nice. Oh, good. Thank you. That's one of the bigger pieces that was there. And yeah, I think that's nice to know as well for your own, what you like in terms of your own art, right? You tend to go for work that is more realistic and has movement in it. Or
Has
do you
anyone
tend
else made
to?
anything? I don't know if people are making or just watching.
Yeah, I'd love to see what people are creating. And here's mine is evolving as I color in my circles.
Oh,
Evolving, and we'll just see how it can change over time. Just decided I'm just going to go with these 3 colors, even though they went with every color. So a funny thing I remember from high school art class, they said you should always leave one color out. But you probably noticed that the reason for that is not partially not to overwhelm the eyes, but then partially to kind of, there's something missing, then the eye might sort of notice, and leaving the color out would be like strategic sort of thing. But it seems like Robert and Sonia did not leave any colors out. And I'm like, I really like that. I like the rainbow of colors that they used. And it was, said that Sonia, was born into a Jewish family, but I guess she did not sort of remain sort of spiritually Jewish. But I thought that was intriguing. She was born in Ukraine and didn't come from a Jewish upbringing, but her work, I don't know if there's much spirituality in her work. If you probably wouldn't say it doesn't feel very spiritual. It feels much more sort of interconnected on the level, sort of the body, right? The physical level versus a spiritual sense.
Well, I appreciate, let me just stop the recording.
No, they don't have